Right now, there is a woman in your life who is telling you something, and you are not hearing it. Maybe it happened this week, in a conversation you've already forgotten. Maybe it happens every time you see her, in a small gesture you walk right past. You are not missing it because you are careless. You are missing it because nobody ever taught you what to actually look for. Men are trained to wait for the obvious moment, the confession, the bold move, the unmistakable sign. Women rarely give you that. What she gives you instead is quieter, smaller, repeated. It hides in ordinary behavior, dressed up as nothing at all. So it slips by, again and again, while you wait for a signal that was never coming in that form. Here is the question I want you holding for the rest of this video. What is she actually doing right now that proves this isn't friendship? And why haven't you let yourself see it? By the end of this video, you will be able to go back through your last few conversations with her and know, with real clarity, which column they belong in. Not guesswork, not hope, actual recognition. Because once you know what you're looking for, you stop missing it. It's not that you're bad at reading her. You're reading for the wrong language. Most men were raised on a kind of romantic shorthand, big gestures, clear declarations, obvious chemistry that announces itself. That shorthand works in movies. It rarely works in real life, and almost never works with a woman who already knows you, who already trusts you enough to be subtle instead of dramatic. Researchers who study attraction have noticed something men consistently underestimate: that interest is most often communicated through small, repeated behaviors rather than singular, dramatic ones. In plain terms, she's not going to hand you one giant clue. She's going to hand you a dozen small ones, spread out over time, expecting you to notice the pattern. That is the part most men never learn to do. Of course, not every quiet gesture means something. Plenty of small behaviors really are just small behaviors. But when you don't know what to look for in the first place, you can't even begin to separate the meaningful ones from the meaningless ones, so everything gets filed under probably nothing. It isn't her fault, and it isn't yours either. It's just two different systems trying to communicate without a shared dictionary. That gap in language is exactly where the first sign hides, in something almost too small to notice. You mention something once, just once, and 3 weeks later she brings it up like it mattered. Maybe it was a throwaway comment about a stressful week at work, or a passing mention of a song you liked, or the name of a restaurant you said you'd been wanting to try. You didn't think twice about saying it. You probably forgot you said it at all. Memory researchers describe this as elaborative encoding. The brain holds on to details more strongly when it has attached emotional significance to the person delivering them. Translated simply, she didn't memorize a fact. She filed away a piece of you, because some part of her decided you were worth filing away. Think back to a conversation that once seemed ordinary, one where you walked away without realizing what had actually just happened. Now, you might be thinking, couldn't she just have a good memory in general? Sometimes, yes. Some people remember everything about everyone. But watch for this specific pattern. Does she remember small details about you that she doesn't seem to remember about other people in the group? That asymmetry is the real signal, not the memory itself. Here's where most men go wrong. They notice she remembered something, feel a small flicker of flattery, and then move on without ever connecting it to anything else, treating it as a nice coincidence instead of the first data point in a much larger pattern. That kind of memory takes effort, and effort always shows up somewhere else too. Friendship is convenient. This isn't. A friend fits you into the gaps of her schedule, whenever it's easy, whenever nothing better is happening. But pay attention to what happens when seeing you actually costs her something. Does she still show up? Maybe she shifts a commitment she didn't have to shift. Maybe she stays an extra half hour after everyone else has already left, with no real reason to. Maybe she turns down another plan, one you never even hear about, just to keep the door open in case you're free. Behavioral psychologists call this preferential allocation of time, which simply means we spend our limited hours on the people we value most, often before we consciously admit who that is. In plain language, time is the one resource nobody fakes for long. Talk is cheap. A rearranged Tuesday is not. Of course, context matters here. People reschedule things for friends too, especially close ones. The difference is consistency and cost. One favor means little, but a repeated willingness to sacrifice convenience, specifically for you, over specifically for others, starts to mean something real. The mistake most men make is assuming availability is just personality. She's just a generous person, they tell themselves, without ever checking whether that generosity is evenly distributed or quietly concentrated on one person. But availability alone isn't proof. It's what she does with her body when she's near you that tells the rest of the story. She'll tell you she sees you as a friend. Her feet will disagree. There's a reason body language experts pay so much attention to where the feet and torso point in a conversation, far more than the face. The face is the part we're trained to control. The lower body is the part most people forget is even being watched. When a woman feels drawn to someone, her body tends to angle toward them, even in a group setting where her face might be turned elsewhere. Researchers refer to this as unconscious orientation, the body positioning itself toward what the mind finds significant, well before the mind has fully decided to admit it. Watch for it next time you're in a group. Notice whose direction her shoulders and feet are quietly facing. Mirroring is the second piece. If she starts adjusting her posture to match yours, leaning in when you lean in, picking up her glass when you pick up yours, slowing her speech when you slow yours, that synchrony rarely happens by conscious choice. It happens when the nervous system has decided it's comfortable enough to fall into rhythm with someone else's. She'll tell you she sees you as a friend. Her feet will disagree. Now, a qualifier, because this matters. A single instance of mirroring or proximity means almost nothing on its own. People do this with friends, with colleagues, even with strangers in a good mood. What matters is whether it happens consistently, specifically around you, regardless of who else is in the room. Most men catch this signal occasionally, feel something shift in their gut, and then talk themselves out of it because she didn't say anything explicit afterward. That contradiction gets even louder once you notice what happens when another woman enters the picture. Watch what happens to her face the next time you mention someone else. Not her words, her face. There's almost always a half-second window before she has time to manage her expression, a flicker that comes and goes before the polite version of her reaction takes over. That window is the part worth paying attention to, not whatever she says afterward. You bring up another woman, maybe casually, maybe just mentioning a coworker or someone you matched with. Watch closely. Does her energy dip slightly, even while she stays friendly on the surface? Does she ask a few more questions about this other woman than the topic really warrants, when she dropped the conversation about everyone else after one sentence? Evolutionary psychologists describe this as mate-guarding behavior, a term that sounds more dramatic than it really is. In simple terms, it just means that when someone feels a sense of investment in you, even an undefined one, attention going elsewhere registers as a small threat, and the body reacts before the mind agrees to admit why. You might be thinking, couldn't this just be normal curiosity? The kind any friend might have? Sometimes, sure. But normal curiosity doesn't usually come with a subtle drop in warmth toward you in the minutes that follow. That combination, curiosity about her plus mild withdrawal from you, is the actual tell, not either piece in isolation. Remember what I told you at the start, that there was one signal most men not only miss but actively misread. We are getting close to it now, closer than you might think. The mistake here is obvious in hindsight. Most men either miss the flicker entirely, or they catch it and assume it means she's simply territorial by nature, without asking why that territory exists around them specifically. That protectiveness isn't random. It's tied to something she's quietly afraid of admitting. She isn't trying to annoy you. She's trying to find out who you are when she pushes. Teasing gets dismissed constantly, treated as nothing more than a personality trait, when in many cases it's functioning as something closer to a test. Not a calculated one, not something she's consciously orchestrating, but a test all the same. She challenges something you said, lightly disagrees with an opinion, pokes at you about something minor, and then watches, without quite realizing she's watching, for how you respond. Do you get defensive? Do you fold immediately just to keep the peace? Or do you stay steady, push back a little yourself and stay relaxed while doing it? Social psychologists sometimes call this a vulnerability probe, a low-risk way of gathering information about someone's emotional stability before investing anything real. In plain terms, she's quietly checking whether you can handle a little friction without falling apart or lashing out, because that tells her something about what you'd be like if things ever got serious. The same logic applies when she shares something mildly vulnerable, a worry, an insecurity, a moment of doubt about herself. That isn't oversharing. It's a smaller-scale version of the same test, watching how carefully you hold what she just handed you. She isn't trying to annoy you. She's trying to find out who you are when she pushes. Of course, some teasing really is just teasing. A habit, a personality quirk, nothing deeper. The distinguishing factor is whether the testing intensifies specifically around emotional topics, and whether she seems to be watching your reaction more closely than the joke itself would require. Most men either get defensive in these moments, killing their own case without realizing it, or they laugh it off so completely that she never gets a real read on who they actually are underneath the joke. And the more she tests you, the more she starts doing something most men completely overlook. Listen for the tense she uses, not what she says, when she says it'll happen. This one is easy to miss because it doesn't sound like anything significant in the moment. It sounds like ordinary conversation. But the structure underneath it tells you something most casual talk never reveals. Pay attention to whether she talks about future plans, events, or even hypothetical situations in a way that quietly assumes you'll be there. When we go to that place, instead of, if we ever go. You'll have to try this, about something happening next month, not next week. Small word choices, almost invisible but consistent. Linguists who study this call it presupposition, language that assumes something is already true rather than presenting it as a possibility up for discussion. Translated simply, when someone includes you in their future without pausing to ask whether you'll actually be part of it, some part of their thinking has already decided you will be. This is different from making actual plans, which anyone might do with anyone. It's about the casual, almost careless way future tense slips into ordinary sentences when you're the subject of them. A kind of unconscious bookkeeping that places you somewhere down the line without her noticing she's done it. Now, you might object, couldn't this just be politeness or a verbal habit she has with everyone? It's worth checking. Listen to how she talks about other people's futures compared to yours. If the casual inclusion only shows up around you, that's the pattern worth trusting. There's a quieter version of this too. Sometimes she'll leave a door open in the near future, asking what you're doing later in the month without an obvious reason attached. Most men hear this kind of language and feel a brief lift, a flicker of hope, and then dismiss it a moment later as wishful thinking on their own part, rather than recognizing it as data coming directly from her. That kind of inclusion only deepens when she starts protecting something most people never let anyone see. Anyone can see her highlight reel. Almost no one gets the version with no filter. Most people are reasonably good at managing how they come across, pleasant, composed, socially smooth. That version of a person is easy to access and tells you very little about how she actually feels toward you specifically. What tells you more is the version she lets slip when she's not performing. A bad day she doesn't bother hiding from you even though she'd hide it from a casual acquaintance. An opinion she states bluntly without softening it for your comfort, because she's stopped treating you like someone who needs managing. A moment of genuine insecurity, about her appearance, her choices, her future, spoken out loud instead of buried under small talk. Psychologists studying close relationships often point to something called selective disclosure, the simple idea that people calibrate how much of their real, unedited self they reveal based on how safe a specific person feels to them. In plain language, the more unfiltered she becomes around you, the more her nervous system has already decided you're not someone she needs to perform for. This matters because the social version of someone is available to almost everyone. The unfiltered version is reserved, consciously or not, for people who've earned a different category entirely. Think about how few people in your own life ever get to see you on a genuinely bad day. That short list says something. Hers does too. Of course, comfort alone doesn't always mean romantic interest. Some people are simply unguarded by nature, or trust easily in general. The detail worth watching is whether this unfiltered version shows up selectively, more with you than with others in her life. rather than as her default setting with everyone she meets. Most men actually notice this shift happening. They feel closer to her, more trusted, but they interpret it purely as friendship deepening, without ever asking themselves why that particular kind of trust tends to build specifically toward people we're drawn to, not just toward people we like. There's one sign left, and it's the one almost every man dismisses as nothing at all. You've been waiting for her to be smooth around you. That's exactly the sign you've been misreading. Here's the part almost nobody expects, because it runs against everything we're taught about confidence and attraction. When stakes feel low, people are relaxed. When stakes feel high, when something actually matters emotionally, most people get a little less polished, not more. So if there are moments where she seems slightly less composed around you than she does with everyone else, a sentence that trails off, a laugh that comes a beat too late, a question she asks and then immediately seems to second guess, that isn't disinterest. In a lot of cases, it's the opposite. Researchers who study social anxiety in romantic contexts describe this as evaluative apprehension, the nervous system response to caring about someone's opinion of you specifically. Put simply, we tend to relax around people we don't need anything from. We get a little more careful around people whose reaction to us actually matters. That is the moment most men walk away from without realizing it. Most men interpret this exact behavior backwards. They watch her get a little flustered, a little less fluid than usual, and conclude that she must be uncomfortable around them, maybe even mildly turned off, when in a meaningful number of cases, it's the clearest version of investment she's shown all along. Of course, this isn't universal. Some women stay composed even when genuinely interested, and nervousness can come from plenty of unrelated sources too. A bad day, an off mood, something happening elsewhere in her life. The signal isn't the nervousness in isolation. It's the nervousness specifically around you, contrasted against the ease she shows with people she has nothing emotionally at stake with. Once you see that, everything you just learned starts to reorganize itself into one clear picture. One of these signs means nothing. 3 or more, repeated, mean almost everything. Take any single behavior we've talked about today, isolated from the rest, and you could explain it away. She remembers things. She's generous with her time. She's a little nervous around new people. She likes teasing her friends. Each piece on its own has a perfectly innocent explanation. But that's not how real signals actually show up in someone's behavior. They show up layered, overlapping, repeating across different contexts and different days, all pointing in the same direction at once. Behavioral scientists who study how people detect deception or genuine emotion describe this as convergent evidence. The idea that no single data point proves anything, but multiple independent signals all agreeing with each other, becomes very hard to explain away as coincidence. This is the shift I want you to walk away with. Not a checklist to obsessively run through after every conversation, counting signs like you're keeping score. That kind of overanalysis tends to create more anxiety than clarity, and it often makes men act strange around the very woman they're trying to read. Instead, hold this loosely. Let it sit in the back of your mind the next few times you're around her. A lens you're finally allowed to see through, not a test you're administering. Does she remember the small things? Does she show up when it costs her something? Does her body agree with her words? Does she react when your attention drifts elsewhere? Does she test you? Include you in her future? Let her guard down? Get a little less smooth around you specifically? One of those, on its own, tells you very little. Several of them together, repeated over time, that's not a coincidence anymore. That's a pattern. And now you know how to see it. So here is the truth sitting underneath everything we just walked through. A woman who's drawn to you rarely says it outright. She shows it, in small, repeated ways, and waits to see if you're paying attention. That's the whole pattern. Memory, time, posture, jealousy, testing, language, vulnerability, and that quiet flicker of nerves, different shapes of the exact same thing. You don't need to overanalyze every glance or replay every conversation looking for hidden meaning. That kind of vigilance usually backfires. What you need is the calm confidence of knowing what real signals actually look like, so you stop dismissing them, and stop inventing them where they don't exist either. I want to know which one of these signs have you actually seen but talked yourself out of. Tell me which number it was in the comments. I read every comment on this channel, because the real stories are where this gets interesting. If you want to keep learning how she actually thinks, subscribe. There's a lot more underneath the surface than most men ever get shown. Next time, I'll show you the sign men get backwards most often, the one that looks like disinterest but means the exact opposite.